Now, verse 4 goes on to say, in whose eyes a vile person is contemned, but he honoreth them that fear the Lord. He that sweareth to his own hurt changeth not. Or the first part of the verse in verse 4, it says, in whose eyes a vile person is contemned. In helping us better understand what that part of the verse is talking about, that in verse 4 it's saying, and what it's saying, I think is better explained by looking at two other verses from the Psalms that have the very word contemn in it, all right? So turn over to Psalm chapter 10, verse 13. Get in. Psalms chapter 10, verse 13.
Therefore do the wicked contemn God. He has said in his heart, thou wilt not require.
That will not what?
Require.
All right, so you hear how that tone's going, right? Person is what? Starts with a W. Use the word wicked, right? And they're directing it towards who? The word contemn is talking about who? In a bad sense. It's talking about God, right? All right, Psalms 107:11. Beans, if you want to read that one.
Because they rebelled against the word of God.
They did what now?
Rebelled against the word
All right,
of God.
all right, hold on. So they rebelled. Rebelled is a good word or a bad word? Right, against God. All right, go ahead, sorry. So they contemn it. Contemn the counsel of the Most High. So that word contemn is something towards God, right? Psalms 10:13, we saw words like wicked, thou wilt not. 107:13, so saw that word rebelled, right? Rebelled against. So listen, if we just take these two words and these two passages with the rest of the verse that we just looked at there in 4, that we see something bad or negative towards God himself, right? So now, just with those two verses, when we're looking at what we're looking at here, you could see that it's something not good towards God, okay? Now, that word contemn, who thinks they understand what that word means? What does that word mean? It's not a pleasant word. If you contemn something, what are you doing? It means to despise, to consider or treat as mean and despicable, to scorn. So we can see that here in verse 4. It's talking about a person who hates and despises God and everything about him. And we as Christians need to be aware of people who either knowingly or unknowingly say and do things against God and not partake in it when they say and do those things, all right? It's very important. But how many times have we been in a conversation with a person, whether at work, in the store, or even in our own family, and they say something about God in the wrong way, and we just go along with it, like when they take his name in vain, and say, oh, blank. Now, when people do that, and I want you to answer this, I want everybody in here, when somebody's sitting there that you know, family member, friend, coworker, you're having a good conversation, and then all of a sudden they use Jesus' name as a curse word or God's name as a curse word. How many in here, how many of you here does that make you uncomfortable? Me. All of us. All of a sudden going along good, and then all of a sudden, boom, they say something stupid like that, right? I know it's happened to me in the past, but we don't say anything about it even though it's wrong, right? We just go along with it because we don't want to seem like rude, and we don't want to make it seem like, I don't know how to explain it. We don't want to make them feel bad for saying something that's bad about Christ in a sense. But at the same time, even when that happens, sometimes you stand there because you just don't know how to walk away from the conversation. And you all know what I'm talking about. But listen, we need to make sure that we don't participate in that the vile person is contemned and not God, because they knowingly and willingly are saying wicked things about God. Now, anything, we should despise them for talking about that. Obviously, we got to be Christ-like, but everybody understands what I'm talking about. Now, listen, I can't speak for everybody here, but one thing that I always made a point and never allowed it to happen is I didn't want to be that person, because I know that even us sitting there and entertaining that is still a sin against God. Because if you're doing that, you're saying, I don't want to cause a fuss. I don't want to have a bad reaction. So I'm just going to go along with it. And if you read Romans 1, if you read the very last verse in Romans 1, that's talking about people having pleasure in that. Not saying that you enjoy it per se, but what that's saying is that you're not saying anything against it, makes it then okay to sit there and do that. Even listening to people talk about that is not okay and acceptable, and God's not okay with that. As a believer, when I first got saved, I sat there and said, as long as I'm not doing it, it doesn't matter. As long as I'm not swearing, as long as I'm not going with the flow, it's not on me. When I learned and understood that, and plus other verses, that shows you, even if you stand there and you're okay with them saying it, and you don't care about walking away from it or saying anything about it, then that is us. You have pleasure in that because you're sitting there saying, well, yeah, I don't really like it, but I'm not going to say anything about it. That's what that's talking about. Now, what I started to do when God really started convicting me about my actions as far as that, right? I get it. They're responsible for their own actions, but we are also responsible for how we act and react to those actions. And that's a verse that stands in my mind. You have to make sure that if those things start happening, do you know the easiest thing to do? You just outright sit there and tell them, listen, I'm a Christian. I don't say stuff like that. Can you please stop? And I'm telling you right now, I never had anybody be nasty, really nasty to me and say, well, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'll try not to. Why? Because it's so ingrained into their hearts and their minds. That's just a normal word. It's a normal function. And then when people kept doing it, I eventually just said, listen, I'm not going to talk to you about stuff anymore if you can't control yourself when you talk to me. And then if they kept doing it, I just walk away and stay away from them. Because you've already set the boundary. You already told them I'm a Christian. I don't talk about stuff like that. I don't use God's name like that. If you're going to talk to me, please don't talk to me like that. And if they go above and beyond that, well, now you just don't deal with them anymore. And if they keep doing it to push your buttons, go to your supervisor or whoever. But the point that I'm making with this is that we have to take a stand when people do those things, okay? We have to take a stand.